Berachos Daf Chav Zayin. According to Rabbi Yehuda, all the zmanim of tefillah are ad v'ad b'chlal. It includes the entire hour. So, the Shemona Esrei of Shachris, Rabbi Yehuda says, goes until the fourth hour. That means including all of the fourth hour. It doesn't mean until the end of the third, but rather it goes into the fourth until the end of the fourth hour. Mincha is until the end of Plag Mincha, the first part of Plag Mincha, which means as follows. Let's talk about the Zmani Mincha for a second. We have Mincha G'dayla. If you take the daylight hours of the day and divide them into 12 parts, that's called Shai Zmani. It's not necessarily the hours that we have today. Chatzos is exactly in the middle, 6 hours in. Plag Mincha or Mincha G'dayla is a half an hour after Chatzos. So it's 6.5 hours. Mincha Ktana is 9.5 hours from the beginning of daylight or 2.5 hours before the nighttime. You take those 2.5 hours before the night and you divide that in half. Plag, half. That's Plag Mincha. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you could say Mincha, you could daven Mincha until the first portion, the first part of that Plag. In other words, 1.25 hours before nightfall is when you have to stop saying Mincha, because it's the first part of Plag and it's the entire part of that Plag Mincha. Musaf, according to Rabbi Yehuda, goes all the way to the end of the 7th hour, ad v'ad b'chlal. Therefore, there's a situation where if a person has 2 tefillas in front of him, he has Mincha, because we said that Mincha G'dayla starts at 6.5 hours into the day, and he has another half hour left to finish off Musaf. Which one comes first? He says, you daven Musaf first, because Musaf is about to expire. You can't daven it past the end of the 7th hour. You only have a half hour left. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava testified 5 things in Masechtas Ediyos. And we pass like Masechtas Ediyos. One of them is that we teach a Ktana, whose mother married her off, and that's only Midrabanan, in order that she shouldn't be hefker. In certain situations, we teach her to do miyun, that is, to say that she wants to negate the marriage, and therefore there's no marriage. In a situation where 2 sisters, including this Ktana, married to a brother, and her older sister, who's a G'dayla, married to another brother. That older sister's husband died. Therefore, she falls to Yibum. She cannot fall to Yibum in this current state because it will be 2 sisters married to the Yavam. Therefore, we teach the younger one to do Miyun, and she'll be a proper Yavam of the older one. He taught a testimony. He said a testimony that you can marry off a woman based on an Eid Echad, one witness testifying that her husband died. He also testified that they did skila to a chicken who killed a person, and that for Nesachim on the Mizbeach, it's enough to be considered old wine, it's enough to be 40 days old. And finally, for our Sugya, the Tamid was Nekrav 4 hours, in other words, the entire 4 hours into the day. And that's why we pass like Rabbi Yehuda that you daven Shachris 4 hours into the day, not until Chatzos. Rav accepted Shabbos. He did an early Shabbos, what we call today, after the Plag, because he holds like Rabbi Yehuda that Plag is the end of the day, and after Plag is already nighttime. Chachamim say you can only be Makabel Shabbos after Shkir. It says Chachamim, depending on which Rishonim, because they hold that Mincha goes all the way to the evening. And whoever does David Gemara, that you could do any way you choose, says the Gemara. If the entire congregation davened Shemona Esrei, they thought it's nighttime, they davened Ma'ariv for Motzei Shabbos, but it was still Shabbos, they didn't see that it's only cloudy day, their tefillah works because of Tirchei Tzibura. But if an individual made a mistake, he has to repeat the davening. Rebbe sat in a Beis HaMerchatz in a sauna before the Gzeira against doing Zeya, and he was Mekabel, that after he was Mekabel Shabbos. So first he was Mekabel Shabbos, went to the sauna, and then he taught Torah. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, who was a Talmud Chaver of Rav, he davened Mincha of Friday behind Rav, who's davening Ma'ariv of Shabbos. And you see from here that Rav didn't take his 3 steps back, he didn't do Eis Shalom, because Rabbi Yirmiyah was still davening Shemona Esrei. You learn halacha that if somebody's davening behind you, you're not allowed to take the steps back, you're disturbing him, or the Mishnah Berurah brings that the Shekhinah is there. However, if it's out of the 4 amas of the person, you're allowed to. And the only reason why Rabbi Yirmiyah was allowed to daven behind Rav is because he was also his friend. He was a Talmud Chaver. But a regular person, a regular Talmud, is also to daven behind his Rebbe. If he does, he causes the Shechina to leave Klal Yisrael. Just like if a Rebbe says Shalom to a Talmud, and you answer him back like you would answer to a regular person, Shalom, instead of saying Shalom Aleichem Mayri, that also causes the Shechina to go. And if a Talmud opens up a yeshiva without asking permission and gives shiurim, that's Misali the Shechina. Lahalacha, a person could make an early Shabbos and he can make Kiddush before nightfall, as long as he repeats Kriya Shema afterwards. Shmuel says that a person could daven Motzi Shabbos on Shabbos itself and make Havdalah on a cup before Shabbos is over. A very interesting story. The Gemara says that in the name of Rav, they said that Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi stood at this particular pillar and he davened the tefillah of Shabbos, Ma'ariv of Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos. Says Ula, that's not what happened. It happens to be, it wasn't a pillar, it was a palm tree. And it wasn't Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi, it was a Rabbi Lazar bar Rabbi Yossi. And it wasn't Erev Shabbos on Shabbos, rather it was Shabbos on Motzei Shabbos. This is machlokes whether the Ma'ariv is obligatory, do you have to daven it or not? And the Gemara brings, and therefore our Mishnah says, Ein lo keva, our Mishnah holds that it's not a chiyuv. And the Gemara brings the very famous story that Reb Shimon bar Yochai asked Rabbi Yeshua, do you have to daven Ma'ariv or not? And he said, it's a reshus. And he went and he asked Rabbi Gamliel, who's the Nasi, and Rabbi Gamliel said it's a chayva. But he said, wait a minute, Rabbi Yeshua says it's not a chayva. He said, let's wait until everybody comes. Everybody came to the Beis Medrash and he says, ask me. He said, do I have to daven Ma'ariv? And Rabbi Gamliel says, you have to daven Ma'ariv. But Rabbi Yeshua said, I don't have to. No, so Rabbi Gamliel says, is anybody here mechuluk? And Rabbi Yeshua said, no, nobody argues with that. He said, but they said in your name that Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai said that you said that it's a reshus. Says Rabbi Yeshua, I can't argue with him. He's alive, I'm alive. How could I argue with him? Rabbi Gamliel forced Rabbi Yeshua to stand as the shir went on, and the tzibur was very upset. And they said, last year when it came to Rosh Hashanah, Rabbi Yeshua paskined that it's Yom Kippur, and Rabbi Gamliel said, I want you to come on Yom Kippur, which I hold is not Yom Kippur, with your stick, with your money. And you paskin when it comes to B'chairas, by Rabbi Tzaddik HaKohen, that you made Rabbi Yeshua stand up like you did today. We have to get rid of Rabbi Gamliel. Who's going to be instead of him? Rabbi Yeshua can't be instead of him because he's part of the story. Rabbi Akiva can't be instead of him because he doesn't have schus avos. It has to be Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah because he's a chacham. He knows how to answer everybody. He has schus avos. He's 10 generations from Ezra, and he's wealthy. He can go deal with the Kesar. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, I have to ask my wife. The famous excuse. So he asks his wife. His wife says, but what if they remove you? It's better to be a glass cup and that breaks the next day than not to be anything. But you don't have white hair. The famous story on Pesach. That day it was a nes, and he had 18 rows of white hair. And Be'ez Hashem, like they say in Cheder, the Rebbe always says, tomorrow we'll continue the story. Be'ez Hashem, have a wonderful day.